Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Richael Young, and I'm the Senior Director of the Water for the Future program at Sustainable Conservation. Very honored to be with you all today. I'd like to invite my panelists to come up on stage, and as they do, I'm going to tell you who they are, though they may not need introduction because they have been pillars of this community for so long. So our panelists are Graham Fogg, Professor Emeritus of Hydrogeology at UC Davis, Kamyar Guivetchi, retired as Executive Director on the Water Innovation and Technology at California Department of Water Resources, Ellen Hanak, Adjunct Fellow, and was the founding director of the Public Policy Institute of California's Water Policy Center, and Daniel Mountjoy, the Senior Advisor and previously the Director of Resource Stewardship at Sustainable Conservation. I am so honored to get to moderate this panel. I'm big fans of all of yours. I want to open this up by hearing about how you got involved in this work. I recognize that all of you have been involved in FloodMAR longer than FloodMAR has even been a term. So tell me a bit about how you got involved in this work and what role you played. We can just go down the line.
Okay, well, thank you, Richael, and thanks everyone for coming and participating in this forum. I'm jazzed, and I'm happy to be the Where's Waldo of this group. You know, at the Department of Water Resources, going into FloodMAR was an evolution and building on several efforts. And by and large, the team that did that work is called Statewide Infrastructure Investigations. And I know that a number of the team members are here in the room and online. So let me ask those who are in the room to stand up. Don't be bashful. Come on. Thank you. And online, I know Jenny Marr's there and likely other team members. Back in like 2013, 2012, 2013, the legislature and the governor directed DWR to do what was called the System Reoperation Study. And this was the state's way of saying, before we build any more expensive infrastructure, let's see what more we can squeeze out of the infrastructure that we already have, either by reoperating the infrastructure and also look at connecting surface water and groundwater. And that work basically resulted in a report that came out in 2014. And basically, the study said that there are some opportunities for squeezing some more water supply out of our system, but it's been pretty well optimized in the way that it's regulated and operated. And what we heard from the operators is, even the little bit that you've said is still available, we've kind of been doing that all along. And so the next phase of the system reop began looking at what now is called FloodMAR. What more could we do to squeeze the water supply that we have into beneficial uses? And that was the floodwater. The other was SGMA required DWR to do the water available for replenishment, or what's affectionately known as WAFER. And when we did that study, again, we kind of limited ourselves to what's the minimum in-stream flow and what can the current infrastructure and water rights system handle. And when we looked at that wedge of water, we realized there's all this flood water that's above that, and nobody's talking about doing that. And then that led into, as Mike mentioned, the white paper, and that was really a discovery document. What have people already done, and what are the information gaps? So that really was DWR's entree into FloodMAR. We did not invent FloodMAR. Actually, Jenny Marr came up with the term. She's always wanted to add a second R to FloodMAR. So I'll just leave it at that.
Great. Ellen.
Thank you, Kamyar, and good morning, everybody. So I have a research hat among the bubbles that Mike showed you on the chart, and started working on water at California at PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, back in the early 2000s. And one of the first projects that we did was looking at water marketing, and relatedly became very clear that water banking and groundwater banking was a very closely tied practice that was where California in some ways was leading the world, in places like Kern County and in Southern California, but those were in contexts where there was some really good groundwater management rules and regs in order to protect both the people who were storing the water and the people who were neighbors of that banking. And so that piqued my interest early on, and you could see that there were places up and down the valley that in some ways kind of informally relied on this kind of practice, a conjunctive use. So some of the pricing for water supply in some areas would be adjusted in order to kind of get people to use more surface water when there's a lot of it, and use less and use more groundwater when there's not so much. So we had been looking at that, and then Sigma came around in 2014, and it was clear that the San Joaquin Valley was going to be the real hot spot or trouble spot or spot of many opportunities, let's say, to put a positive spin on it. So we started digging in on that and teed off of, to some extent, the work that Kamyar and the team did at DWR of looking at water available for recharge, and then sustainable conservation. Car ride with Ashley back in 2017 spurred the why don't we find out how much people are actually recharging now that Sigma is here. So we did a survey then, and then another one in 2023 to kind of find out what was happening on the ground, and it was exciting to see that the interest in that across the valley, and so I'm feeling like it's the trajectory that we're seeing is great, and hopefully looking forward to hearing more about what people have been doing.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. For me, this is really kind of a personal journey of my whole career. I grew up on small stream as a child and just loved the flow of water, and have always been interested in how water flows across the land and how it affects the landscape and how it infiltrates. And as an undergraduate, I worked in Mexico and learned about traditional indigenous systems where farmers were capturing water on their land, slowing it down and infiltrating it. As they disturbed the soil for agriculture, they were losing that water. They were having flooding problems downstream, so they learned to capture that water on site. And that work led me to strawberry fields here on the Central Coast, and working with the NRCS for 17 years, our whole strategy was how do we keep water from running off of ag land, keep it on the farm, let it soak back into the ground, avoid the flooding problems downstream. And so when I came to sustainable conservation 13 years ago and met Don Cameron, it was all of a sudden this aha moment that these small systems that farmers were doing on hillsides could be applied across the entire Central Valley. And Don really demonstrated that this was possible, this intentional flooding concept, that we could actually take the water off the rivers and put it on the farmland. But as everyone said at that time, he was crazy. Why would you do this? And so the piece for me was, how can we move from a concept that seems to work to getting broad acceptance of that? And so really the role I've been fortunate enough to be able to do is to help promote that, first with farmers, meet with industry groups like the Almond Board, irrigation districts, and continue to explore this idea of how do we expand this. And then I was fortunate enough to work with the with the DWR to be a co-chair of the Research Advisory Committee, invited to co-chair that, and started to see 200 people gather and come together around how can we bring all of these different disciplines, all this knowledge together to unravel this goal that's clearly out there but needs to be solved. Excuse me. And then also being involved in the watershed studies with DWR to actually look at what scale could this go to? Can we actually capture water across the landscape using all the existing infrastructure, all those untapped pieces that Kamyar discussed? And I also just have to say that Graham was my professor at UC Davis and took a course from him. So interacting with all these folks for so many years has just been a true honor.
That's the strawberry fields forever story, I think. Yeah, there's several students here, and it's great to see them. I was thinking last night on when I started thinking about Floodmar, before we called it that. And I guess it was the early 2000s through my teaching. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, but in the late 1990s, I tasked myself with teaching a freshman course at UC Davis based on Cadillac Desert. It was called Water Power Society. Several students here know of this course. And a theme in the course was water and climate change. And to me, it was common sense. Climate change will result in more winter runoff. We will not be able to store that runoff in our reservoirs because of how they operate. So the place to store it, if we want to store it, would be in groundwater. And you could build additional reservoirs, but that's going to be a drop in the bucket compared to what you could, in theory, put in groundwater. So I think I started teaching that theme in about 2002. Then 2009, I tasked myself with writing a National Science Foundation integrated graduate education, research, and training program to fund graduate students. And the theme there was climate change, water, and society. And I went back and looked at the proposal last night, and indeed I had in there basically what we're talking about with Floodmar here, but really more looking not so much at the floods, but emphasizing this growing imbalance between the timing of the water coming down the hill and the storage capabilities. And at the same time, my students and I were doing work on the geology of the Central Valley in a more advanced way that led to, the publications on the so-called paleo valleys that are really opportune, ideal places for rapid recharge, relatively rapid recharge. That work didn't come to fruition until about 10 years, 15 years later, when people started to grab a hold of it, which is so true of a lot of academic work. But that IGERT, the NSF project, got funded, and I created courses that taught about climate change, water, and society that emphasize this thing. Ellen Bruno, right here, was one of the alums of the IGERT. It funded 17 PhDs over 5 years, 6 years. And then in 2015, we got funding from University of California for a multi-campus research initiative, which we later called UC Water. And that led to me being able to pull together the water resources folks, the groundwater folks, the reservoir operations folks. I'm talking about people like Jay Lund, Sam Sandoval, and others at UC Davis, to look at, and Roger Bales at UC Merced, and Josh Veers at Merced, and Andy Fisher at Santa Cruz, and Mike Kaparsky at Berkeley, to work in a more directed way at this problem, which led to what I consider, good benchmark work on Floodmar right here in the American River Basin, on the American River, and the gravels between the American River and the Cosumnes. So that led to about 4 or 5 publications that was Floodmar. And then 2017, Helen Dalga and her student, Tiffany Kachis, wrote what I regard as one of the most important works on Floodmar, I believe it was 2017, documenting how much water is hydrologically available, and documenting that it's a hell of a lot of water in theory, on paper, et cetera, et cetera. We know the rest of the story is more complicated, but I think that helped break loose a logjam in thinking. And I think it was that same year that I thought it was Safiq Khan that coined the term Floodmar, but I guess it was Jenny And I first heard about it at a GRA conference then. So, and then, the rest, just kind of unfolded. I think it was 2017 also that the DWR's white paper on Floodmar was put out. So to me, I started out thinking about it as a groundwater person surrounded by water resources people, thinking, well, gee, if I teach about this and write about it and talk about it, people are going to do it, which is completely naive. But that often happens in academia. Not that the work went for naught, but I think eventually people caught on. I will say, in the first 10 years, I encountered a lot of skepticism about this. We seem to be past the age of just rank skepticism about it. You could still find reasons to be skeptical because, we're still recharging much less than we think we could, right? So there's that. But that's one of the reasons we're here. So that was kind of my evolution.
Great. Well, it's really great to hear about all of your origin stories in this space. And one thing that I'm hearing too is that some of the origins came from collaborating with other partner organizations and started with some partnership building. It's really very exciting to hear about. You've all had really incredible careers and a lot to be proud of. So looking back, what would you say you're most proud of in your career and why? And Graham, we'll start with you and come this way.
Oh, I guess my students, first of all. I came to UC Davis in '89 because I realized I had a lot of ideas, but not the capacity to carry them out. I needed people with whom I could pass on ideas. I'm much better at that than doing, I learned, which, is a good position for a professor. If you can pass on lots of ideas and you're surrounded by people who can do them, who are the graduate students, and that worked out for me. But the work I guess I'm proudest of is the work my students and I did on fundamentals of groundwater phenomena and heterogeneity and the modeling of geologic heterogeneity. So methods, but also the meaning of groundwater phenomena and complexity for water quality, sustainability, and groundwater surface water interaction. And later on, the recent work we've done on closed basin hydrology and how that's closing off sustainability in many basins if we don't open the basins hydrologically. So there's basically, I love all the work that my students have done, and I rest on their efforts, really.
It's a great way to outsize your impact.
I think for me, it's this room. The last 13 years of working from Don's idea and identifying all the different people that have a role in this, that no one of us can solve this issue. And I think that sort of the fundamental thing that I'm most proud of is it's a bottom-up approach. We didn't come to this and say, this is what the people of California need to do. It was working with farmers, listening to industry groups, listening to flood management folks, listening to irrigation districts, and hearing what all of them were saying, and in planting seeds of new ideas, but through the cross-intersection of dialogue that this Floodmar Forum has been doing now for so many years. To me, that's just incredibly gratifying to see that by putting people together in a room, we can have better ideas. It's what Mike said about the two ideas. I mean, there's 200 ideas that we're that much richer for. And there's lots of pieces along the way that supported that, and I'm super proud of the partnership we had with Earth Genome to develop the groundwater recharge assessment tool as a way for us to understand what's the potential of this concept on the landscape across basins scale areas, looking at the infrastructure, talking with the districts and the farmers. So the technology, but also the bringing the people together. And really the technology should be there to help bring us together. And I'm proud of that.
Well, so I have kind of the same vibe as Daniel in if I think about what made me excited to go to work every day. It was, how do you bring, really solid research and bring together all of the different types of expertise you need on the research side, but also how do you ground that and make it relevant for folks who are going to be needing to do the work, whether they're, growers, water managers at the local level, folks in the state agencies and the federal agencies. So that was kind of the philosophy of that we launched at PPIC in the water program and kind of what makes the Water Policy Center at PPIC work. And so I can say, it's been exciting. I've had partners, everybody up here, plus many of the folks in the room and elsewhere on various kinds of research projects, and it was just always exciting to kind of bring people together around those issues. And if I had to think about what topic, because we've worked on a lot of different things, but what I'm most proud of in terms of the sort of the meat of the work, it's probably the work on the San Joaquin Valley, where what we tried to do in our team was complement the work that was being done at the very local level by trying to say, okay, what's happening valley-wide? Because the way Sigma's set up, it's all of the different GSAs, they have to be, everybody in the basin has to be in a GSA, and it's sort of, there's a decent organization to make sure things don't fall through the cracks in that way, but there's not yet really an effective way for cross-basin communication to happen and projects to happen. And what we wanted to do was sort of try to provide big picture look at, okay, what's the situation for the valley as a whole? Where are there, who's doing better at certain things? Where are there opportunities for collaboration? How can you, the folks that are innovating here, maybe help with this? And I think what I look forward to more in that context as folks who take the baton on this and work further on it is how do you figure out the infrastructure plays that are going to help take Floodmar further, where it's across not just a few GSAs in a basin, but really across the valley.
So my nameplate here says DWR retired, and I was there for 46 some years as a student assistant and on, and I, having been there so long, been to a number of retirement events, and the one through line of all of them is I'm not going to miss the work, but I'll miss the people and the interaction. And I think that's probably what I'm most proud of in my career. You can kind of I think of my career in three segments or parts. One, the first dozen was working on delta studies, and part of that was the Interagency Ecological Program, which is a collaboration of state and federal agencies who monitor and collect data and do studies in the delta. Well, at the beginning, they weren't working together, and sometimes we'd be monitoring multiple agencies at the same site. And so that collaboration, to me, really helped bring a lot of knowledge, information, and expertise together. Next one is the Suisun Marsh Program, the largest brackish marsh remaining in the U.S. And there were four entities that really were key players: the Department of Water Resources, the Bureau of Reclamation, the two water projects, and then the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Suisun Resource Conservation District, basically the refuge land managers. And the initial, it was very litigious and a lot of conflict between these entities. But what I'm really proud of is through working collaboratively, we basically went in front of the water board, all four of us, and did a joint proposal for how to protect the Suisun Marsh and the water quality standards and the management practices. And it really showed me that if you listen well, you get a lot of free advice, And if you collaborate, you come up with more durable solutions than if you're constantly trying to fight each other. And then the last segment is thought of as DWR's water plan to what SB 72 is now the legislature and the governor of saying this is the state's plan and everybody has to be part of that. And during those 24 years, we went to a very open and transparent and engaging process that include many people on advisory committees, the Tribal Advisory Committee, Tribal Water Summits, EJ caucuses, et cetera. So we really brought in lots of new ideas that are reflected in the California Water Plan. And during that time is, again, this through line of collaboration, good listening, and engaging is when we worked on our flood-mar work. And as already mentioned, a big part of that was the white paper was not DWR's white paper. It was pulling together all the knowledge that we could get our arms around that people had already worked on and identified the data and information gaps. And that led to the Research Advisory Committee and the plan that showed how can we fill those gaps. And ultimately, or most recently, the San Joaquin watershed studies, which really demonstrates that if we can work together from headwater to groundwater to outflow institutionally and across water sectors, how much more could we realize? So it's growing the pie before we think about how to reallocate that water. And there's a lot of water resources and opportunities that are unrealized because of our institutional framework, which is very siloed and fragmented.
This is, really incredible to hear. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of themes around, bringing more folks to the table as well as building a bigger table, whether that includes, the governor and the state legislature, researchers and students and districts and farmers. It just, really occurs to me that there's a lot of capacity building that's being done not only internally but externally as well with your institutions and the role that each of you have played through your careers. I'd love to hear a bit about your secret sauce. If we would like to replicate some of the success that you've had, what would you say your secret sauce was to the success that you've had in your career? And Kamyar, I'll start with you.
Okay, so it probably came through in my prior comments, but I've kind of, during my career, came up with what I call my why. And I think those are my secret sauces. And the first one, my mantra is connecting dots. I just get so frustrated when people don't know what each other are doing, duplicating effort, and not benefiting from each other's work. So connecting dots. The other is spanning these institutional and sector silos through better communication. I think one of the things I've observed is, and it was kind of mentioned already, that when you start an initiative, you've got to think of the people, the process, and the technology all together. And sometimes we fall into the trap where we focus on one more than the others, and usually you don't get good outcomes that way. So really thinking holistically, and I think the flood-mar network really demonstrates how that can work. And then ultimately my superpower are these rose-colored glasses, which keeps me optimistic and coming back for more.
So I had a hard time thinking about, Richael gave us these questions a couple weeks ago, and I I thought, do I have a secret sauce? So I think, it's a combination of being willing to accept magical thinking, but also you have to be a badass about the data and figure out, okay, what do the numbers actually tell you? Let's, people can have great ideas, and don't say, there's no bad idea, but then you gotta also ground it in the hydrology, in, you know, the reality of where stuff is of the geography, and also of the social and institutional systems that there are, and see, okay, well, how much of this could really work, just from a technical standpoint. Now, with today's system, how much could work if we got a little magically creative on thinking about a different system, and then what would need to change in terms of policy and in terms of regulation and in terms of just people like realizing that they could get mutual benefit out of something and maybe cut a deal.
I think my practical, or my secret sauce I mentioned before is the bottom-up approach. I think it's presumptuous to come up with a solution until you've talked to those on the ground. And knowing your audience, knowing those who are going to have to live with an idea is essential. And so I root that in practical experience. Get out on the ground and do it. You know, try it yourself. Test it out. And once there's an idea, once there's a practical concept, so first piece of the secret sauce is get out there and do it. Second piece is think about how you can strategically communicate it with the right people who need to know that knowledge or who can do something with that knowledge. Not just broadcast it to the world, but be strategic in how we can communicate. And that oftentimes means going to an entity that's going to oppose it and find out why they're opposing it, so that, again, you're grounding it in truth and in reality, so that you know what your opposition is, you know what the challenges are going to be. And I always referred to problem solving to me as you know, skinning the onion. You think you know the answer, and then you peel another layer away, and there's, oh my God, there's all these folks that have a different opinion on this, and how am I going to learn what their perspective is? And so it's going into each of those camps and understanding what their perspectives are, so that you can actually talk to them. And out of that, you then start to develop a solution that's going to work. And it's not your solution, it's everyone's solution, sort of what Kamyar was talking about. And the other piece for me was overcome the naysayers. In my whole career, right from the very beginning, I mean, how many of you are in your first 10 years of your career? A few folks. Especially in that period, I had so many people say, oh, you can't do that. No, we tried that. Nope, doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And my secret sauce was find someone else to talk to. Don't talk to the person who said no. And also be persistent and adapt to the naysayers. Figure out what it is they're saying, why it won't work, and adapt to that. And both of those two approaches have been critical to me. And then to actually scale a concept to me has been about promoting policy. You only promote policy once you have all that knowledge. And then you can advocate for policy that will actually work for the various parties. It's not just one group that you're advocating for. You're advocating for a package that's already a solution that's going to fly. Pick your battles.
Well, I don't know. Last weekend I made award-winning ribs, but the awards were only within my household, and the sauce was store-bought. I don't know if that counts, but nothing secret about this. But I guess as an academic, you know, we're supposed to create new knowledge. And what's new knowledge? Well, it's, you know, basic knowledge that applies broadly. And to many people that means, oh, basic research. You're not an applied researcher. But what I always did was I looked at the problems that we have, whether it be groundwater quality sustainability, groundwater quantity sustainability, remediation of contaminants, groundwater surface water interaction, the characterization of geology. I always looked at those sort of applied issues and found basic research within them. And then I guess the other part of the menu or the recipe was, talking to my graduate students about that, and occasionally undergraduate students, and trying to inspire them to pursue these various things. The other part of the secret sauce there was trying to give my students enough freedom for their creativity to come out. So I always realized that there's always going to be students that are smarter than me, but as coming up through undergraduate programs, they've been told what to do every step of the way, and for many of them, they've forgotten how to listen to their own voice on what they think is new or creative or cool. So this usually worked, and there's some that went off the rails, but for the most part, because I let things go perhaps a little bit too much, but it resulted in a lot of really exciting work that both was new knowledge and had application. In some cases, the applications didn't come along in terms of people's awareness of what.
A lot to be pretty negative about. And so what I find really inspiring about your comments is that you're talking about, bringing optimism, not listening to the naysayers, magical thinking. I really loved that. And then that kind of freedom and creativity to kind of go beyond the constraints that we're normally told, are important to be successful in this field. And my hypothesis is that maybe this is the reason that Floodmart has been so successful, is that there have been so many innovative thinkers, and that, in the water world, change is typically decadal. It takes a long time to make change, but we've seen through PPIC's reports how much Floodmart has, grown in the course of a 12-year period, and particularly for on-farm recharge. And there you're dealing with the combination of not just water policy being slow to move, but also, growers being risk averse. And so to see those be overcome, I think, is in large part because of the, optimism and magical thinking that you all have brought to this space. So with that, I'd really like to hear about your hopes for the future. And so what excites you about the future of California's water, and where do you hope to see us 20 years from now? And Graham, we'll start with you.
Well, I've always felt that California is the best place to work on water. It's exciting. Everything is happening from, mountain snowpack to watershed issues, watershed management, groundwater catastrophes, and groundwater management structures to try and deal with those crises and so on. So it's a very exciting, stimulating place to work on water. I guess that alone is enough excitement for me. In terms of what's going to happen, I'm worried. I'm worried about, whether we're going to bring to fruition, the reductions in groundwater pumping and the increases in recharge that are necessary to sustainably manage the groundwater system. I think there's potential for still many more new paradigms of thinking on water management, particularly groundwater management and flood control in California. I'm doing what I can to help things along, but I'm still really on the edge of my seat on what's really going to happen. So, but I think meetings like this do provide hope, and they provide a forum with which to enact change and action. So.
I think crises drive innovation, and my early work with watershed, Elkhorn Slough watershed with the NRCS, we were trying to mobilize people to care about water quality and runoff, and there was no interest whatsoever. And then we had a big flood, and all of a sudden everybody was out and talking. And from that moment, we were able to gain all these interesting ideas, and people had solutions, and they wanted to work together. And I think climate change is our mega challenge, our mega crisis. And I think, probably all of us in this room we would rather work on something creative and innovative than just do the same old thing that we did last week. I mean, that's just kind of our human nature. So we're being handed this gigantic crisis, this big motivator, and it's going to force us to think in new ways. And, you know, as institutions are slow to change, yes, that's true, but I mean, Kamyar, you were such an inspiration to me 10 years ago when I thought DWR was only about water delivery. And you started talking about new ideas around, you know, cross integrated solutions. And to see DWR shift in these last 10 years is really inspiring to me. And to see the new people that are getting hired out of programs like Graham's, you know, all of the people that are in their first part of their careers, you guys have so much opportunity to influence these organizations as folks like us retire. There's just a lot of opportunity to bring new ideas in. And those ideas, you know, I'm excited about multi-benefit ideas, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Not just fixing a problem, but fixing multiple problems. You know, there's so many more opportunities to have win-wins. I remember hearing about how much water goes to ag and how much goes to wildlife in California, and then realizing that tailwater from rice fields becomes environmental water. It's like we fail to count the benefits that can happen if we just think about one piece of it. And so I'm excited about the whole shift in reservoir reoperations. I think that's a really big opportunity in the state right now, and I think the Corps is thinking about that in new creative ways. It's going to be slow, but there's a lot of ways to use those reservoirs. And to think about water rights, which right now is a big barrier to flood-mar, thinking about that in terms of seasonal floodwater rights. You know, how do we think about when water is available, how we allocate that water as opposed to it's all allocated. And all of those things require significant institutional partnerships. And it's people like us that are in those organizations that can shape that. And then I'm also excited about technology. The monitoring technology that allows us to get better gauges on our streams, be able to know how the groundwater systems are behaving. The more data we have, you know, the more science and information we have, we can make better decisions. So those of you that are developing these new technologies, it's so critical to better decision making. I'm a glass half full kind of guy.
I'm going to say sort of what he said for the future. And then just think back 20 years ago to where we were. And I mean, it wasn't awful, but we've made tremendous strides in a number of areas. One of them is there was really no groundwater data, except maybe, you know, Graham's models and, you know, the occasional thing, but like there was really, it was a lot of it was we kind of had a sense and we kind of had a feeling, but we didn't have the data groundwater wise, but also, you know, in a number of other water types of reporting, people weren't reporting surface water diversions. I mean, there were just a lot of things that we didn't have. We didn't have a good handle on the drinking water quality challenges that are so prevalent in some rural areas. A lot of things that we just didn't even, we kind of knew they were issues, but we didn't have the data. Now, we've got a lot of that data, and it's always improving, and it's publicly available for the most part. It's just, people can use it, and that spurs creativity on how you think about an accounting platform. And, you know, the sky is the limit with what people are going to be able to do with this. 20 years ago, we did not have groundwater management, except in places that had it so bad that they went to court or came to the legislature to get permission to do that. Now we've got, you know, 10 years in, 11 years in from Sigma. It's amazing to see what a change there's been in the landscape. And yeah, we're not done, but it's we went from being like the only state that didn't have groundwater regulation at the statewide scale to one of the places that people look to as really a model for how you might be able to do things. And, you know, those are a couple of examples. I could go on, but, you know, in the interest of keeping it going, I won't. But just to say, don't, don't shut out the possibilities in your, if you've got a dream about something that you'd like to see 20 years from now, start working on it.
Yeah, so I think following on Mike Antos's presentation and what Ellen just mentioned is let's not forget our accomplishments as we think about what more we want to do. Who would have thunk that the governor would have passed 3 executive orders in the last few years that in some way is incentivized more flood-mar? And it wasn't because one stakeholder group went to the governor and said, you have to do this. It was this collective effort, and Sigma, because that's the need, and people realize that there's some untapped opportunities. So I really think highly of the flood-mar network, and in fact, part of the network story that Mike Antos talked about, that document, not the five-year accomplishment, but there was actually a network story that talks about how this network came to be. We made that a supporting document of the last update of the California Water Plan, the 2023, and in the context that we need these kinds of networks in each and every watershed in California. And right now, in various watersheds, we have integrated regional water management groups, we have GSAs, we have regional flood groups, we have water quality collaboratives, we have ecosystem protection organizations. They need to come together in this kind of a network and begin thinking of co-managing their watershed from headwater to groundwater to outflow. And that's the way to tackle all of those details, the devil's in the details, because what it does, it links a bunch of problems with a bunch of assets, but everyone doesn't, those assets have to be brought together collectively to actually address those problems. So my vision for 20 years from now, we'll have 40 to 50 watershed networks in California that are bottom-up, organically managing, co-managing their watershed. And those networks don't just include the people who live in that watershed, it's people who rely on that watershed, as well as the state and federal agencies that have some responsibility for the resources in that watershed. And I think in the next 20 years, we could do that. And that then leads to this joint discovery. Yeah, data is good, and people collect data, but our data is as siloed as we are. And so what we've got to do is find ways to bring all that body of knowledge together at a watershed scale, and then really push forward together to do that climate change vulnerability assessment, the adaptation strategies that can help us lessen those vulnerabilities, and most importantly, knit together the pots of money that different sectors and institutions in that watershed have control over.
Great, thank you all. Well, there's certainly no shortage of both challenges and opportunities when we think both about the implementation of Sigma and climate change. And so there's going to be a lot of work cut out for early and mid-career professionals in the next 20 years. And so to close, I'd love to hear about your advice to the next generation. We saw that we have quite a few early career professionals here, a lot who are new to the Flood-Mar Forum, myself included. And so I'd love to hear what advice you would give to early career professionals to make a lasting impact in water resources. Or in other words, what advice would you give a younger version of yourselves? Yeah.
Okay, it's going to sound repetitive, but that's just who I am. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. We've got to work on our social institutions to better align the way humans have sliced and diced our water cycle with the way the water cycle evolved and wants to function. And if we can better align those institutions and sectors with the water cycle, we're going to get more and better ecosystem services out of those very natural systems, the natural infrastructure. And one of the big footnotes, and luckily or thankfully, 2 years ago, the legislature and the governor finally put aquifers in the list of recognized natural infrastructure in California. So we've got to think of aquifers the same way we do of river systems, forests, floodplains, wetlands, in the context of, by improving and making them healthier, we're going to get better ecosystem services. And in doing that, we should be able to use public dollars to help replenish our degraded aquifers. And then ultimately and concurrently, again, remembering people, process, and technology have to go hand in glove to make things work.
Okay, let's see if I can do this really short and sweet. Pick your battles. Thank you, Daniel. Keep it interesting and keep it fun. And what I mean by keep it interesting is, try to learn something new every day. Even if you're working on a bigger project, it's going to take a while. Try to learn something new every day. And the keeping it fun is connect with people over what you're doing. And if you can meet a new person every week, that's great. Things like forums like this are a perfect opportunity. So take advantage of opportunities to connect.
We're going to need leadership in every sector of the water world. And we hear that in terms of leadership. I don't think when I started my career, I didn't envision being a leader. And so my definition of leadership has shifted over time to think about there's so many ways to be leaders in this whole water world. And some people are really technically oriented and just love diving into a technical problem and working the spreadsheets. And if you're one of those folks, make sure you can communicate that outward, because it's so important, the work that you're doing, but to be a leader, it means you got to be able to share it. And I had my daughter's boyfriend got out of school and said, I'm going to be a city planner, and no one will give me a job doing that. And I said, well, what have you done so far? And he says, well, I've got a degree. And I said, well, you need to get some practical experience. He didn't want to take the jobs that he was being offered, which were kind of basic. And I think, you have to start basic and then build up from that. And if you're a technical person, what could you build that knowledge to inform? If you're a communicator and love telling stories, learn that science, learn the information, and learn the audience so that you can be an effective communicator. If you like the idea of policy, get down in the trenches and understand what the people who that policy is going to affect, understand their needs. We can lead in so many different places, I think, and even like Ellen said, I really like the idea of do the thing that you enjoy doing. Pick the thing that the kind of work you like doing, because that'll sustain you much more than, I looked at doing a big economics program at Stanford for my graduate work, and I realized I wasn't going to enjoy this, but doing an agroecology or a human ecology program at Davis was much more interesting to me. And both were important. I could see the impact of either of them, but I had to choose one that would give me enjoyment of doing it. And then I think the other thing for me is leading from behind. You don't have to be out in front to be a leader. And there's so many ways that we can each facilitate informed decision making. By planting ideas, leading with inquiry, asking people who are opposing an idea, ask them a question that might make them think differently. There's so many ways to shift thinking that don't mean being out in front. And don't shy away from complexity. I think what Kamyar's been talking about, these issues are complex. And you may feel like you only have expertise in one part of it, but that shouldn't keep us from talking to others about the other pieces. Find those that know those other pieces, bring them together so that you can look at this problem from an integrated perspective and not just think, well, this is what I know about, so that's all I'll work on. You know, we have to step out of our comfort zone and bring others in to work with us to actually solve these problems.
It's been said, but find your passion. I guess I found my passion in about 50 years ago in hydrology. After that, it never felt like work. When I entered UC Davis in '89, I felt like a privilege to be able to even have the job and do the things I was being paid to do. So that's indicative. When it feels like that, you've sort of found your passion. For those in science, I often give this advice, to get good at something, to become an expert at something, takes a lot of effort and time. In science, typically, that effort and that blossoming happens in graduate school. So I try and get students to realize that, okay, if you're going to get really good at something, you want that financial security, that happiness in your chosen area of passion, you're going to have to work hard. And you're going to have to work more than 40 hours a week, 60, 70 hours a week at some time in your life to develop that expertise is likely necessary. Will that make you a workaholic? There's a lot of concern about this amongst young students. So while workaholism and working hard in graduate school are two different things. If you have a tendency to be addicted to that, that's another thing. But in my experience, it really pays off for someone, once they decide what they want to do, immerse themselves in it, and that's commonly what graduate school is for in the sciences, if we can continue to have funding for the scientific research in the future. But I'm also optimistic about that. It will pay off. And it doesn't mean you have to work your ass off your entire life. But there's a time for developing that deep expertise that doesn't just come from a high IQ or from just one's ability to perceive nature. It's deeper than that. It requires hard work that will pay off. So don't be afraid of the hard work.
That's great advice around finding your passion, and it's very clear that all of you have found yours. I'm curious, just asking the audience. We've heard about technical and maybe social, more soft sciences. I'd love to see in this audience who would identify as being more on the technical side. Our engineers, our geologists, and then who would be more on the social side? Oh, wow. We've got a really good mix. I don't think the water world was always like that. So I think it's really great to see both our hard and soft sciences coming to the table together to solve these hard problems. Well, it's been such an honor for me to get to moderate this panel. Thank you all for your time and sharing your expertise and hard lessons learned. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Oh, hold on. Wait a second.
Okay.
We can maybe keep you up there for a few minutes. We've got, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes. We wanted to close out with offering you folks, especially the folks, it's your first time at the forum event, or maybe you're an early career professional, to offer some reflections on what your hopes are for the future, your visions for Floodmar 20 years from now. And I want our panelists to stay up here in case you want to respond or react to any of the ideas that we have shared. And you might see me over here taking notes. We're going to produce some outputs from this, and the conversations today really guide the ship of the Floodmar Network activities over the next couple of years until we meet again. So what ideas do you have? What are your hopes for the future? Mike and Marisa are going to help run some microphones. We got one in the back. See the hand again? You. Okay, great.
Yeah, really enjoyed what everyone said. And so my thought is, I spent 15 years in Nevada, and I just keep hearing we don't care about what you do in California. But the truth is right when all this Floodmar stuff was happening in 2000s. It was also happening in Nevada. Like Walker River Basin, the farmers were purposely flooding their fields to enhance recharge when there was a lot of flood water. And I mean, they called it Agmar, so it was kind of a different thing, but it really was a similar thing. And now California's gone, you know, full gangbusters forward. This all the work that's been done, and it's really happening. It's not happening in Nevada. And it's because of all the, you know, policy and legal issues and the stuff that's getting in the way. And, you know, I wish that we could, in California, kind of embrace Nevada and their water and work together, because it's the same. Whether you're on the west side snowmelt, east side snowmelt, we're dealing with the same kind of stuff. And if anyone knows people in, you know, those positions in Nevada, like how do we build a coalition across states? I don't know if that's a question, but it's a statement.
Who else has got something they'd like to share 20 years from now? What do you hope to see? I saw your hand, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
So I'm not too sure I'll be around 20 years from now, but what I'd like to see is the state legislature and the governor sign legislation, as they have done with housing, to tell municipalities what they have to do with housing. The same thing for floodplains, because we need to protect our floodplains. So if the legislature can do what they have done for housing, they need to do the same thing for floodplains.
That sounds like it belongs on the next big thing poster board. Another hand here.
Yeah, I don't want to see the same institutional inequity that we see in a lot of our water systems, water rights, just happen with Floodmar as well. I don't want the have-nots to get left behind because the haves have the political will, the money to make these programs happen. And so I know, Rochelle, you're going to talk about incentives, right? But yeah, in 20 years, I don't want to look back and just see a bunch of people left behind, disadvantaged communities, you know, that kind of thing. So.
I got a hand over here.
Yeah, piggybacking on that idea, it'd be lovely to have Floodmar focused in the next 20 years on how can we provide water security for communities specifically in a way that they want, that they're engaged with, and that protects their water supplies, both water quality and water quantity. So if we as a community can really think about how is that even possible, is that possible, where is it possible, that's something I would love to see.
Who else can picture themselves at the table 20 years from now? The second wave of Trailblazers. Go ahead.
I'm not necessarily young in my career, but I'm hoping to be here in 20 years. But so I come from a background more with urban stormwater, so municipal separate storm sewer permittees in that, and we're actually working with stormwater capture, so it's not quite on the Floodmar scale, but it's, you know, green infrastructure, bioretention planners, porous pavement and that. So I'd like to see more kind of collaboration with all these people that are putting in these green infrastructure devices for stormwater capture from a water quality perspective, but connecting more with Floodmar. How do all these different pieces come together? I'd like to see more Floodmar. And just wondering, I'm wondering how much the water supply practitioners and agencies are involved in Floodmar, and I don't know if anybody can speak to that. Thank you.
Got a few more minutes, right, Megan? 3 more minutes. I see Helen's hand. 3 more minutes, Helen.
I'll keep it short. Very crazy idea. In 20 years, I would like to see wider recognition of the importance of water in every human being's life. I'd like to see more recognition of private industry that they need to invest in keeping these water resources available for us. I don't know if Aaron Fukuda is in the room, but we discussed developing a 2 to 5 billion water fund for the state of California to invest into water. And I'd like to see a little dashboard that keeps track of the flow in every river, the downstream water rights, that need to be fulfilled, the environmental flow that the river needs, and what's left over in real time, so that we can get away from having thresholds that don't apply to every watershed, but actually see what is the surplus in real time.
How much time, Megan? One or two more, great.
I've just been thinking recently about a lot of different situations that I've seen, one in the Klamath watershed, and then also thinking about mountain front recharge. And it just sounds like we've sort of divorced water from the landscape in a lot of places, and it seems like a lot of the solutions are to put water back on the landscape. But then I also see the conflict coming with, you know, the drier landscape, the lack of snowpack, and it just seems like there is a lot of opportunity there to sort of break out of how we have channelized all of our water, right, and taken it away from the landscape. But then the conflict with perhaps we will have less water, or we'll have water at different times of year. So I think there's a lot of challenges with that, but also just sort of thinking about how do we put water back on the landscape, because it benefits all of the storage, all of the groundwater as well.
And we got the last hand here.
Excuse me. I hope in 20 years that students, as someone who grew up in California, that students in school get to learn about our watersheds and to be able to inspire creativity and have young people ask questions and get involved in the water space before they get to college and realize that it's a topic that people care about, because I don't think we get the opportunity to understand the complexity of California's water.
Can I just say something quick? Building on Rich Niswanger's comment about Nevada and California, Floodmar is being talked about quite a bit in other places. I'm not suggesting that this network should expand to nationwide or even the western states, but they're probably, and Texas is really thinking very hard about this. I reviewed a major paper that's probably going to be published in a major journal about Texas. I made sure to get lots of their missed citations of representing what has happened in California in that paper. Don't worry, I identified myself by name. But nevertheless, they are embarking on, a sophisticated analysis of this that includes water rights and surface water flows, minimum flows, and so on. So there's things increasingly to be learned from the other states. And by staying solely California, in terms of what happens more broadly, professionally, we risk being a little bit insular, I suppose. So this is a bigger thing than California, even though California is probably the best place to do it because of the melting snow, and Nevada.
But there the water goes to the terminal basins and then wildlife suffers if you don't let the water go.
Yeah.
So it's not here where it goes to the ocean.
Wasted to the ocean, yeah.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This is great. This is the kind of network activity, everybody talking and laughing together. This is wonderful. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan to get us moving to what comes next.
Well, what's next is a round of applause for our opening panel. And wait, hold on. I want a quick picture of you all, but we are going to take a 14-minute break. So we've got some fresh coffee, granola bars, a stretch break. We will reconvene at 10:50, 10:50. And we have Cheyenne with Sustainable Conservation snapping some professional pics. If you do not want to be in any of the pics that may be used on the floodmar.org website and Sustainable Conservation's materials, maybe other network materials, let us know, no problem. We will make sure you're not in them. I'll say that again.